Awesome. So yes. So hi everyone. My name is Joy. This summer I've been working on a project with my mentor John Haverlack, and that's been developing a small energy utility gap assessment. So that's exactly what I did this summer. And what a gap assessment entails is basically a series of interview questions. Since I was doing cybersecurity, it's questions relating to cybersecurity. So this can be IT networks, physical security, management styles, just anything that can fall in the realm of cybersecurity. And then that's then generated into a report, and it can be relayed back to the organization to get them an understanding of what their cybersecurity levels and protocols are like and where they can improve. It's especially helpful if there's some things that are really easy, quick, and cheap improvements that can help organizations buff up their own cybersecurity. So that's kind of what I've been working on. And the goals of this project was, again, to write a cybersecurity gap assessment, but specifically tailored to small energy utilities. So organizations that have a smaller amount of employees and may not have an IT professional. So they're working with their IT networks, but they may not have a good understanding of all of the technical terms or like policy grade information that comes along with IT and cybersecurity. So my goal was to kind of take some of the policies and make them easier to interpret to someone who doesn't have all of the background knowledge of all these technical terms. So some of the policies that my gap assessment needed to align with was C2M2, which I'll go over in a second, Bill Section 4026, and NIST 800. Those ones don't matter as much, but they're just cybersecurity frameworks. And then the final goal was to actually conduct these gap assessments with some of ACEP partners. So that includes Kotzebue. We went up to Kotzebue and visited their electric association, since that's the big partner with ACEP, along with ACEP Cameo Lab and the ETF. So got to do some on-site assessments. And that was, a large part of that was so that I could get feedback on how to improve the gap assessment and make it even easier for people to do it on their own. So this right here is the C2M2 self-assessment, and it is the standard gap assessment tool recommended by the Department of Energy, so kind of going over anything related to energy. And it's broken up into 10 different domains or sections, going over, like I said, physical security, management styles, all these different things. And it's nearly 400 questions. So again, my goal was to take this 400 questions, narrow it down. I narrowed it down to about 100 questions, so it could be done in an interview over, I think when we broke it up, it was about 2.5 hours broken up, instead of doing 400 questions, which can take like 6 hours, and small energy utilities that have that don't have a specific IT person don't really have the time to answer 400 questions for 6 hours. And so kind of, this is what the report looks like once it's generated. These are random results that I put in. They don't reflect any of the organizations we talked to. But there's MIL1 through 3, and that stands for the maturity level. So maturity level is just like, if you're at maturity level 1, it means you're maybe doing a little bit for cybersecurity, but there's a lot of ways you can improve. There's easy ways to improve, and your overall cybersecurity protocols aren't really up to standard. And then maturity level 3 is like, you're pretty up to standard, protocols are good, there's always room for improvement, but you're doing pretty good. But this is kind of what the report looks like once it's been compiled, and then that's then taken and broken down a little bit more and then relayed back to the organizations. So bigger picture, why we're doing this is to develop resources for rural utilities to perform a self-assessment. So this allows them to just have a baseline understanding of where their cybersecurity is at, instead of bringing in a third-party organization or doing one of these really long self-assessments. And ACEP has a lot of ties with energy utilities across the state, so that's kind of why we got involved. And then in a more general sense, there has been a rise of cyber incidents via malware or even targeted attacks against utility facilities. So there's a huge push for higher standards of cybersecurity among the energy sector, especially because these utilities provide energy for critical infrastructure. So that includes things like hospitals, wastewater treatment, and airports, things that are pretty important that they're working correctly. My research method, this thing over here is the NIST framework. Oh, never mind. Okay. This framework, it just says identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Those are 5 key concepts in cybersecurity that you want to keep in mind with your data or anything you're doing. So when I first started out on this project, the biggest thing I had to do was get familiar with all the policies, how they relate to each other, and then also adjust to technical writing. The C2M2 that I discussed earlier had a lot of technical wording and things I'd never heard of or concepts I didn't really have a good understanding of. So I had lots of meetings with John to kind of break that up so I could understand it. And then once I had a good understanding of these concepts, I did my first draft, which basically was just rewriting all the questions in my own words, which was like 250 questions. And then I did a test run with ACEP's Cameo Lab and found that even just one section took over an hour. So I decided to squeeze that down even more, just getting rid of repetitive stuff, leaving questions more open-ended so a conversation can flow instead of interrupting for question. And then once I felt good with that, in mid-July, we went up to Kotzebue, went up with John and RJ and Solomon, and did an on-site gap assessment for them. And then that's now been recorded and is going to be relayed back to them pretty soon. And then when I got back, did a gap assessment with ETF. And those were both really great experiences just for my own feedback and kind of understanding of how some of the cybersecurity protocols look in the professional world. So lessons learned. My biggest challenges were policies, just reading through policy. It's not something I've done in really any of my classes or anything before. So getting familiar with those setups, and then acronyms. There's so many acronyms in cybersecurity. I started a list the first week and gave up after like my 4th page. And then during the interviews, figuring out when to ask something or when to just let the conversation flow and then figure out everything in between when you're doing the report. Changes, I think I would spend less time on policy. It was important and I'm glad I have an understanding of it, but when it came to my actual project, it wasn't as important as I put time into, but still good to know. And then I would have done more time workshopping. So I think I would have done some more test runs just to get more feedback and narrow it down a little bit more. And then advice to anyone I'm passing it on to would be to break it up, especially with the C2M2 assessment. It's very long and dense. So just breaking it up with other activities or other things for work. It was nice because I had lots of meeting with John and RJ going over random cybersecurity topics that weren't related to C2M2, and that was really great. And then in conclusion, was successful and completed 2 on-site gap assessments, and then documentation for further reference and for future gap assessments for small energy utilities. Final thoughts is I had a really great time at this internship. I learned a lot and it was really cool to see the connection between cybersecurity and energy, especially just growing up living in Alaska, hearing about all of the renewable energy and then my interest in cybersecurity. It was cool to see how those two can combine. And then things I enjoyed the least were the acronyms. And then the C2M2 self-assessment, just because it was really long and I went over it like 4 times. So don't really, that was okay, but it was a lot of C2M2. And then the things I enjoyed the most was seeing the technical and organizational aspects of cybersecurity and how they apply in energy facilities and then also like at ACEP and different organizations. And then the other thing is hands-on experience. So getting to go to Kotzebue and visit with their utility and ETF and just kind of doing some hands-on projects related to other cybersecurity topics. All of that was really just a great experience. So with that, if you have any questions, please let me know. Any questions?
questions? Perfect. Okay, we'll switch it over.